Scott Lauber was on the call, and he'll help answer some things that we've been talking about and going back and forth on throughout the day in the show and on our website. Scott Lauber covers the Phillies for the Inquirer, Inquirer.com, and he's kind enough to hop right on here as Clintac just finished up a little while ago. And there's a lot of questions now that come actually on the field. Scott, how are you, pal?
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Doing well, man. And I guess some of the things, I think the most interesting question, and I don't know if he was asked this, but it looks like he was, about Spencer Howard. Now, I didn't hear his answer. But if Spencer Howard is on the 60-man player pool and he has a shot to make the team, number one, does he have a shot to make the team? Would it not be as a starter? And does that mean essentially that the three guys that were battling for that fifth starter spot are now in line for bullpen jobs?
Spencer Howard is part of the player pool. So now the question becomes, does he become part of the 30-man active opening day roster, or is he part of the taxi squad that goes to Lehigh Valley and is there in waiting, essentially to replace someone who was on the active roster? The same issues apply that applied in March with him in terms of service time and being added to the 40-man roster. As soon as he's added, his clock starts toward free agency, and in a normal year, what teams are more and more teams are doing is they are waiting. So they're waiting. It's usually about 2 weeks into the season, maybe a little bit more, and then they call the guy up, add him to the 40-man roster, and plug him in because they can then save a year of service time. In other words, a year toward his free agency. So you'd still control him for 6 full years if you do that. Now, in a short season like this, I think the waiting period would be about 7 days. 7 days could mean 7 games. 7 games, we know, is a much larger portion of the season now than it would normally be. So if it were me and I were a general manager, I would say, you know what? I know what we're doing by putting him on the roster from day one. We're giving up a year of our control over him, but what general manager has a 6-year security anyway? Very few of them are going to be in their positions 6 years from now. I would do what it takes to make my team better now, and if he's one of my best pitchers, and I believe he is one of their best pitchers, I'd put him on day one. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to look at it that way. They might decide that from an organizational standpoint, it's important to have Spencer Howard under control for 6 full years. And in that case, they would wait, 7 days. One thing we know will not be a concern is workload. That was something we talked about a lot in February and March in relation to Spencer Howard. He only threw 90-plus innings last year, and how would they manage him? Well, now it's a sprint to the finish. If he were on the roster from day one as a starting pitcher, he'd probably make only, 12 starts or so. So you're looking at 50, 60 innings. He could do that. He would have done that and then some. So workload won't be a concern, but service time will be, and we'll see how they go from there.
Right. I mean, that to me is an interesting storyline. If they just decide, hey, we're only playing 60 games, he's only going to make X amount of starts, we don't have to worry about workload, he's the best guy we got, let's use him. And then that means Velasquez, Pivetta, and Ranger Suarez, I guess, all would potentially go to the bullpen. So I guess, do you think that's realistic?
I think it's possible. Look, I think the other thing about this is that you're going to need, we all know in a normal year you need more than 5 starters. You're definitely going to need more than 5 starters now because even Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler and Jake Arrieta are not going to be stretched out to throw 7 or 8 innings per start early on. So what I think you're going to see a lot of is, what they call piggybacking in baseball, where one starter comes in, he starts the game, he pitches 3 or 4 innings, then another starter comes in behind him and gives you another 3 or 4 innings. And I think that's going to happen a lot in the early going. They've all been throwing during the shutdown, but they haven't been in a spring training camp, and this new camp is 3 weeks. So it's a 3-week ramp up to the season, and I don't think anyone's going to be throwing 6 or 7 innings out of the gate. So I think you're going to see, your quote-unquote 5 starters, and then I think you're going to see 3 or 4 more other guys who are the piggybackers who come in behind those guys, at least for the first, 2-3 turns through what would be a 12-turn rotation, basically, if they get through the whole year.
Well, how does that actually impact the guys that are really in the bullpen, the Adam Morgans of the world, the Hector Neris's, the Uranos? How is the whole throwing a couple starters out there going to impact their game?
I don't think it impacts it tremendously because you're still going to need, Hector Neris late. I mean, it's not like someone else is going to pitch the ninth inning when they have a lead. It's going to be Hector Neris. His role doesn't change. And I just think it pushes guys toward the back of the game a little bit. And, if you've got a big lefty coming up late in the game and you need a lefty, you're still going to call on Morgan or Alvarez to get a lefty out. So I think that their roles will be somewhat similar. But there too, you're not going to be able to throw guys back to back or certainly back to back to back early on. So Girardi, I think, has even discussed this. In terms of a normal season, he doesn't like to throw guys on consecutive days and whatnot. So he's certainly not going to do it now, even though it's a 60-game sprint to the finish. He's going to be sensitive to the fact that, I think that these guys are going to have to be spaced out a little bit more. So I think it allows you to use those guys in the roles that they were intended. It gives you a chance to kind of lighten the load on them early on the way you'd lighten the load on a starter.
You look at Alec Bohm. We've talked about him possibly being a DH. Did Clintack help clear up a potential role for him, or does the service time rules also? I mean, I know they do apply, but do you think that they take that into account for him as well, or do they figure, 60 games, we got to get the best 30 guys we can, and we need his bat in the lineup?
Yeah, all the same service time rules will apply to him as well, and so I think they'll have to decide whether 7 days is enough to get by, and then call him up. I'm just speculating here, but I think in his case, I do think they may be more likely to take the 7 days. One thing Clintack did say was, in regard to the DH, that they're probably not going, and we've talked about this on this show, they're probably not going to just appoint somebody the primary DH and say, this is going to be our guy. Jay Bruce, you're our DH. They're probably going to use that DH as a way to cycle players through. If JT Realmuto needs a day off from behind the plate, he can still DH and stay in the lineup. If you want to do something where Rhys Hoskins plays, DHs, you could have Jay Bruce play first. It's a way to kind of keep guys a little bit fresh early in the season as well, because it's not just pitchers, it's position players who are going to have to sort of be eased in a little bit to this whole thing. So, they're going to use the DH as kind of a revolving door. Alec Bohm may end up being a part of that revolving door at some point. In fact, I think it's likely he will be. It's just, is it going to happen on day one? And if they feel like they have a lot of options for guys who could DH, then maybe they could leave Alec Bohm in Allentown for 7 days, then call him up and preserve that sixth year of service time.
It's not super surprising, but no Odubel Herrera. What did Matt Clintack say about that?
He said, what you would expect him to say, which is that, Herrera is going to stay ready and remain in consideration for a spot in the 60-player pool. I wasn't overly surprised, to be honest with you guys, that he wasn't a part of the initial group. I thought that they would. I thought that he did not play in a spring training game prior to the shutdown. He didn't come over from the minor league side and play in a spring training game, which was something they could have easily done if they had wanted to. I think the plan all along, was to send him to Lehigh Valley and kind of have him sort of just play there, kind of under the radar a little bit, and earn his way back. Well, he still has to earn his way back, and I just think they looked at it and they said, well, our initial group of 53 guys, he's not on that list. It tells me that there's not a whole lot of interest in trying to trade him. There's not a whole lot of interest right now in trying to put him on the roster. So he is like a lot of minor leaguers who did not make that grouping. He's just got to sort of stay ready. And, if they feel like they have a need, they can always add him. It's much harder to get guys off the 60-man player pool than to put them on. To take guys off, you have to expose them to waivers and you have to, potentially risk losing them. No team wants to lose anybody who they feel like could be a depth player for them down the road. So I think that's why you saw the Phillies and a lot of teams not come right out of the gate yesterday when they set their roster with a full 60. Mm-hmm. A lot of teams were under 53, which is where the Phillies came in. I think you'll see a lot of teams add as they go along rather than come in with a high number and then have to try to figure out how to subtract.
Scott Lauber with us from the Inquirer. Phillies setting 53 of the 60. What is the feeling on Realmuto now? Was that addressed? And, how does the complexity of this season, kind of impact Realmuto's future here? I mean, if they can't get a deal done, they're in an interesting spot. I mean, there's a trade deadline. If they don't have a deal by the deadline, do they consider moving them to try to recoup? I mean, I feel this to be another very interesting scenario.
Yeah, I wrote about this the other day, and, I think that there's this sort of compulsion on the part of a lot of us, certainly fans and a lot of us who, are observers, to kind of look at it and say, great, transaction freeze lifted. They can talk to the agent, they can hammer out a deal, they can get it done by the time opening day starts, and off we go. And it's important to remember that the baseball economy, the economy, but certainly even because we're talking about this, the baseball economy has been affected by the coronavirus and the shutdown of the last few months. The value of a player back in March is not necessarily the value of a player now. And JT has the unfortunate timing of being a part of this free agent class that's probably going to take a beating out on the open market in terms of getting the value that they thought they were going to get. So if you're the Phillies, and I likened it in print in the newspaper to, the price of gasoline. We all know the price of gas has gone down the last 3 months from what it was before COVID-19. So if you pulled into your gas station right now and they wanted to sell you gas at January prices, you probably wouldn't pay it, even though, somewhere down the road, gas prices are probably going to come back. So if you're the Phillies and they are certainly, I'm sure, they have not yet apparently restarted talks, but I'm sure they will prior to the start of the season. Now, if you do that and you make that call and you talk to JT's agents and they're still talking about the prices that they were talking about back in March, do you jump in on that and say, even though he would go out on the free agent market and probably not make what he would have made before? Or do you say, wait a minute, let's let the coronavirus market set itself, figure out what he's worth, and then try to negotiate on that basis? And in this compressed time period, I'm not sure anyone knows what anyone's worth right now. So there are factors here that make this more difficult than just freeze lifted, conversation restarted, sign on the dotted line, because I think we're talking about, a different set of numbers and a different set of conditions. If he was hoping for at least the Joe Mauer number of $23 million annually, which is a catcher record. I had heard that, they were looking at maybe Paul Goldschmidt kind of numbers. He did a 5-year extension at $26 million per last year, going into his last free agent year. And I just don't know if those numbers are going to be available to them right now. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but the Phillies right now are only negotiating against themselves. And I don't know if the smartest thing to do is to really jump in at those numbers right now until you know that they're real.
Do you think that they should be concerned with signing JT Realmuto from ages 30 to 36 at a high price tag no matter what it is? I mean, those are the years where you're talking about a catcher with a lot of miles on his body. Should the age be concerning in general? I mean, I know that they would have had to factor this in before giving up a prospect like Sixto Sanchez. So with that being said, I would think that they thought that through before the trade. But it is concerning looking at how old he is.
Yeah, I mean, certainly what we've seen in recent years is teams that get a little bit gun-shy when it comes to doing longer deals for players on that side of 30. And, he's 29 going on 30, and he is a catcher. He's also in tremendous shape, and he keeps himself in tremendous shape. And the DH is coming to the National League. So maybe that lessens the concern a little bit. If in, 3 years he's got to move out from behind the plate, maybe you could move him to first base and put Reese Hoskins at DH. Maybe you could put JT at DH. There may be some solutions that you might have available to you now in the National League that you didn't have before. So maybe that makes the gamble a little bit less. But no, you're totally right that the trend in the game at least has been players on that side of 30 have a little bit of a hard time getting longer deals because teams just don't want to do that anymore. And catchers specifically, and the toll that their bodies take, it probably increases the risk even more.
We'll leave you on this. We know that McCutchen was not going to be ready to start the season in April, but assuming that when they start in July, he'll be batting leadoff and playing left field.
He'll be playing left field. I think he'll be batting leadoff. We haven't heard from Joe Girardi on that one, but I think Girardi, would have leaned that way back in March. Matt Klentak said that McCutchen completed his rehab in Florida and actually went home for a few weeks to Pittsburgh in the interim. So, he had gone through everything he needed to go through to get himself ready, and he's supposed to be full go here. So when camp begins, I don't think there are going to be restrictions, and he's considered ready to go for opening day.
All right, Scott Lauber, Inquirer. Of course, Phillies set to open up practice, spring training, whatever you want to call it, this week. And, of course, we'll have all that, and you can follow Scott. And hopefully we'll be catching up with him soon, and we'll be talking about more on-the-field stuff. What a thought there, Scott. Great stuff, pal.
Okay, anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Scott Lauber, like all guests, appear to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And make sure you check out his book, The 50 Moments in Men That Made Phillies Baseball. You can go on the beach and read a book. You can still do that.